The information contained in this video is strictly for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or other professional advice and is not a substitute for consultation with a qualified professional. The opinions expressed in the show do not necessarily reflect the views of the Center for Continuing Education and Workforce Development, Borough of Manhattan Community College, and the City University of New York. State of Mind is a web-based discussion program that explores the relevant social, economic, and political issues that are prominent at the post-secondary level of education. State of Mind is sponsored by the Center for Continuing Education and Workforce Development at the Borough of Manhattan Community College. BMCC. Start here, go anywhere. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Krishna C. Nadella, and this is State of Mind. Today we're kicking off a three-part series entitled, Buddy, Can You Spare a Job? Today's topic is about student employment, internships, and full-time jobs. Ever since the 2008 financial crisis, the United States job market has been slowly trying to claw its way back to mid-2000 levels. Unfortunately, many in this country have been forced to reevaluate their professional career paths and in the process, reevaluate their lifestyles as well. No group of individuals has had a tougher break than millennials in regards to starting their careers, let alone developing them. So, with summer internships and full-time job opportunities becoming more and more competitive, it begs the question that students and recent graduates all across the country are faced to ask, how am I going to get a job? With us here today to help better understand the various perspectives on the topic are the following guests. Sarah Lovenheim is the Communications Director for Young Invincibles, a national nonprofit working to advance economic opportunity for young adults. A former aide to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, she helped drive press coverage and led digital strategy for Senate leadership to support policy efforts. Most recently, she directed communications for local and state-based campaigns advocating issues such as raising the minimum wage and education. Ms. Lovenheim holds an MA in Government from Johns Hopkins University and a BA in Journalism from George Washington University. She serves on the JHU Alumni Board of Advisors at the Center for Advanced Governmental Studies. To her left is Dr. Christian Brady, who is the Dean of the Schreier Honors College and Associate Professor of Classics and Ancient Mediterranean Studies and Jewish Studies at the Pennsylvania State University. He serves on the Faculty Senate Committee for Undergraduate Education, the University Ethics Committee, and an appointment to the Advisory Committee for Continued Excellence. Dr. Brady holds 2 advanced degrees from the University of Oxford, a graduate diploma in Jewish Studies, and a doctorate in Oriental Studies with a concentration in Ancient Hebrew and Jewish Literature. His baccalaureate degree in Near Eastern Studies and History is from Cornell University. Sarah, Dean Brady, thank you for joining us today.
Our pleasure.
So, I want to frame up our current situation. I think it's important to start with some statistics. Current unemployment in the United States of America, unemployment for all eligible individuals, is 5.8%. That is down from when President Obama currently took office. But at the same time, the number of out-of-work and out-of-school students out there is around 6 million. So that really leads to the question of what is the current state of the job market and what is necessary for students, I'll leave this with you, Dr. Brady, in terms of when should students start thinking about employment opportunities?
Well, on some level, as they're leaving high school, they need to be thinking about what's going to prepare them best for the job market. At the same time, they also need to be aware of the fact that 75% of them are going to change their major, probably a third are actually going to change the field or the area that they're going to be in. So they have to sort of be open about that. Then the reason to think about it already in your freshman year is so that you've got an eye to the general direction you're going to be going and taking opportunities such as internships, for example, on-campus opportunities to build up your resume, your skill set, so that when you're ready to enter into the workforce, you can articulate clearly the things that you've done to prepare yourself.
Okay. Sarah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd just like to take our conversation a step back for a moment. You mentioned that the unemployment rate is 5.8% nationally, but when we look at the unemployment rate for millennials, that is anybody born between 1980 and the year 2000, folks who are between the ages of 18 to 34 roughly today, the unemployment rate is much higher. It's largely a result of the Great Recession. We're still feeling the economic impacts today across our generation. And I also want to point you to how demographic disparities persist too in unemployment. we just looked at the unemployment rate for young Black adults compared to young Latino adults, for example. And what we found is that even though for young adults 18 to 34, the employment rate hovers about 8%, for young Black adults, it's more than twice that, hovering around 16%. And for young Latino adults, it's not much better. So that means that nearly 1 in 5 young Black adults are still facing unemployment. And that's a real crisis for our generation. So yes, unemployment is getting better across the board, but for young adults, it's a severe problem that we're still trying to find solutions for.
That's an interesting metric that you provide to us, and I think Dr. Brady would provide some context. You see students all across the academic spectrum, not just at Penn State, but in prior schools such as Tulane University. When you look at students from the preparedness to look at job opportunities, summer internships and then full-time jobs, is there a dichotomy between social demographics? And if so, are we as an academic country doing enough to make sure that we support those individuals?
Well, the short answer is going to be no, we're not doing enough. I would suggest that it's really an economic demographic that we're talking about. And of course, we know that African Americans and Latinos are disproportionately represented in the lower economic bracket. That's where the issue is, because our young people who are in an economically disadvantaged context are not getting the education that they need and that they deserve at the primary and secondary level. Consequently, it makes it more difficult for them to get into college, and doors that follow thereon are going to be closed to them. So that's where we really need to begin. Higher education can only do so much. Right. We also need to have a really thorough assessment of our primary and secondary education strategy.
Okay.
I want to jump in for a second to point you to a chart that shows just how great those disparities exist in higher education for young adults in particular. We talked about the unemployment rate and how there are disparities in the job market. Those all stem back to disparities that begin at the college level. We recently did a study at Young Invincibles where we found that it takes 2 additional levels of higher education for a young Black adult to have the same job prospects and wages as his or her young white peer. That's another, huge crisis and burden really on our generation that we need to try to resolve and fast. At Young Invincibles, again, we're exploring policy solutions that I'm happy to talk about, but it does all stem back to higher education.
All right, so let's talk about...
Go ahead, please. I want to ask a follow-up question, because I'm a little confused. So it sounds like you're suggesting that really it's an inherent racism. So even if they have a bachelor's degree, an African American or Latino is going to need an additional degree to be competitive with a white student. Is that the assertion?
So that's unfortunately part of it. However, what we're finding is that there has not been great enough investment in higher education at the state level, and that's largely contributing to those disparities as well. For example, states have slashed their budget since the Great Recession significantly, so much so that less than 10% of state budgets today are being spent on higher education. And certainly, young adults from minority communities are suffering the most from that. Secondly, at the federal level, it's really, a grave consequence of the budget being slashed again for higher education. We'd like to see greater investment in the Pell Grant. The Pell Grant helps so many low-income adults across the country, and if we could boost funding for the Pell Grant, that would be one way that we think we could help more young people access higher education and also be able to afford it.
No disagreement on any of those points. I guess what I'm trying to understand is, well, there's only so much we can do in higher education if the students aren't coming in. So that is not to suggest there's not more that we can do to get students of color and economically disadvantaged individuals into higher ed, but we also need to make sure that they're prepared and ready to come. And I will say, programs like BMCC and the rest of the system here in New York City do a tremendous job of that and are very helpful, and we don't always have those same structures in other states around the nation. But it does have to be a joint effort. We have to make sure when we're talking about educational opportunities that lead into the job market that we don't just look at higher education in isolation. Sure. It has to be a continuum from primary and secondary ed all the way through.
So let's take that to a more practical level. When we talk about solutions, and I'll start with the word strategy, what strategies can rising juniors and seniors, let alone current college students, take to prepare themselves for future job opportunities, whether it be an internship, and obviously the end goal is a full-time job. You see so many students every year, Dr. Brady. Is there anything that you've seen that stood out?
Well, I'm actually going to suggest something that's some would find entirely too general, airy-fairy perhaps even, but it's an intentionality and a reflection. That is, it doesn't matter if you spend your summers being a lifeguard and working those sorts of ways. If you think about what it is that you're learning while being a lifeguard, perhaps it's some management skills, interpersonal skills, maybe even basic training in first aid and things of that nature. And then you consider that when you go and look for another job opportunity and you're able to apply those. And I think this is true every step of the way. It's not that I don't want 15, 16-year-olds to be enjoying their lives, and I want them, my daughter is just going to be 17 in 2 weeks. I want her to enjoy kind of as much carefree as possible, but at the same time, just to be thinking, keep the head up a little bit down the road. And so in that sense, it doesn't necessarily matter so much what they're doing if they can reflect and think intentionally about how what they're doing at the moment is going to prepare them. Now then, of course, there are specific things, and you obviously want students to take on the greatest challenges that are appropriate for them. Not everybody is going to be academically gifted, and so they shouldn't all be taking advanced placement courses in an IB, International Baccalaureate program. But you do want to see a student stretching and challenging themselves, because when you get out into the workforce, those same skills of discipline and determination are going to be vital, no matter what your field is.
So at Young Invincibles, we certainly find that soft skills are important and very much valued across the board by employers. But right now, because it's such a tough economy for at least the millennial generation, we're finding that more and more employers are saying that they value and are really seeking, first and foremost, hard skills. So hard skills are skills such as computer programming that can really prepare our generation for some of those growing fields such as technology.
So the question then becomes, do they need a baccalaureate degree for this? Right. One of the things I think is a great tragedy is the way in which we've lost the value of vocational training. There's nothing wrong with that. And we elevate people with higher degrees. We are effectively in a degree inflation. Jobs that really don't need bachelor's degrees, now you have to have that for competitive edge. Right. I don't know that we can turn back the clock on that. Right. I don't know how we do it, but the reality is, you're right. These basic skills are being demanded in the workforce. College is not necessarily the best place to get those. That's not what higher education historically has been for, and that's okay too. Right. That being said, I don't know, as I said, we can't turn the clock back, so we do have to think strategically as a country, and that's something we're not very good at.
So one step that seems to be helping, that's sort of a middle ground between pursuing a higher education degree and also working your way into the workforce full-time, are apprenticeship programs and also national service programs. Sure. So national service programs like AmeriCorps, for instance, have been shown time and time again to be extremely helpful for preparing young people for the workforce, to help arm them with those hard skills we were talking about before that maybe they can't necessarily always get in the classroom depending on the curriculum they've chosen to pursue. So we'd like to see actually greater investment in national service programs. Apprenticeship programs too are a great value to employers and to the young people who enter them. So for example, if we look around the country, we've seen a very successful program in Norfolk, Virginia. It's a shipbuilding program. You can't go to college necessarily and get all of the skills you need to work in the shipbuilding industry, but through this apprenticeship program that a shipbuilding company has set up for Virginia, we've seen enormous success in preparing young people right out of school for the industry. And we think that if the government were to invest more in apprenticeship programs, that we could see many more young people getting those hard skills that maybe they can't always get in the classroom. There's actually a bill right now in Congress that would help achieve just that. Senators Tim Scott and also Senator Cory Booker, two strange bedfellows usually, have joined together for this bipartisan bill that would boost funding for apprenticeship programs if only Congress would pass it.
Krishna, I have to say, if I ran the zoo, here I mean the National Zoo,
please,
I would institute, actually, I would like to see a 2-year public service required. If you want to go into military, great, but there's so many realms for community service, things that need to be done, and skills to be acquired at that time. I went straight into college. I went to Cornell University, and I did so well that Cornell suggested I take a year to reconsider whether or not higher education was for me. And so I had an enforced gap year, as they call it in Europe. Obviously, academically, I ended up doing just fine. That year off, I worked in hotels, I coached swimming, but that year off was incredibly valuable for me to figure out what my priorities were, to build some skills. So when we lived in England in graduate school, I actually worked my way by being a weekend manager of a hotel.
Really?
Because in that gap year, I had gotten some experience working in a hotel. I was able to translate that through. So I think, imagine our society where everybody coming out of high school is guaranteed an opportunity to work for a year or two, building skills, and if at the end of that time they want to continue vocationally in what they're doing, shipbuilding, computer engineering, whatever it might be, fantastic. If they want to go on to higher education, maybe they now have a bit of a GI type bill, but now they have a better sense of here's where my interests are, here's where my passions are. This period of time between 15 and 20, numerous studies have shown that our brains are mush. As famously said in Paper Chase, our brains are a bowl of oatmeal. We're just not yet fully formed. And yet this is the time at which we decide we're going to do some of the most formal imprinting of our lives. In some ways that's really good because we are so ill-formed, yet there's opportunity there to mold. At the same time, we've got our entire lives ahead of us. So I think taking a year or so to do some public service, to do some work like that, to maybe develop a trade, and then go on to college if that's what's for you. The students I see doing that have some of the greatest experiences and impact on others' lives as well.
So I have to ask, because in the last 25 years, I think we've seen an evolution of the college experience. Everyone's getting a summer job, even before they go to college. Everyone has it all planned out and all laid out. But have we kind of missed the mark in terms of you can have the best laid plans of mice and men, but if mentally, as you said, you're not, and maturity-wise, you're not developed enough, you may be missing out on a whole host of experiences that you'll end up regretting down the road because you never took the time between those ages of 18 to 22 to really explore them and really develop them as well.
That's a really interesting notion. I think the problem right now for our generation is that this is such a tough economy that most young people cannot afford to really explore so much. And we're finding that the young people in college today who are really setting themselves up, at least for financial success, are the ones who are clearly setting a path for themselves, figuring out what hard skills they want to be able to set themselves up as well as possible for the job market right after college. So many young people today are having trouble just landing that first job that, yes, experimenting and exploring different types of career opportunities is fantastic, but with student loan debt at $1.2 trillion right now, and the average college graduate leaving school with $30,000 in loan debt, it's just a very difficult luxury today that most people aren't privy to.
So it does kind of lead to what you were saying, Dean Brady, in that maybe college isn't for everyone in order to find success long-term from an employment standpoint. If you don't mind taking a couple seconds to talk about the type of students that you cater to, the honors education, what type of themes do you see with those students?
Well, I was going to say that, not to be shilling for the Schreier Honors College, but you know, our students who come in, the way our program is designed is it's not just about the academic excellence, but we want them to have broader experiences in the world. We want them to have these other opportunities. And we provide some financial support, but it's not immense by any stretch of the imagination. These students are coming in with an inquisitiveness and a real, as I said, intentionality. They're thinking about these things, about how all these experiences are going to play into their broader lives. They do have a luxury. I mean, the fact that they are in college now, and whether they're accruing lots of debt or a little bit of debt or no debt at all, they do have this elbow room, this time to breathe. And I think where they take those opportunities to, we have a strong gen ed curriculum, general education curriculum at Penn State, build those broader, not just skills, but knowledge and awareness, at the same time developing an accounting degree or what have you. There, we have all of our students come out, either placed in jobs or going directly into graduate school. Those students are not having those difficulties. It's an exceptional group. There's no doubt about it. Would that we could say that university-wide that we have 100% job placement or graduate school placement for all of Penn State. There is a determination as well. And it's great if at the age of 17 you know exactly what you want to do and you can follow that path down. I knew absolutely I was going to be a physician.
That worked out well for you, didn't it?
Exactly. So, but I had, and that's why I needed that year off.
Yeah.
So there's no easy formula. For the high schools and juniors and seniors who may be watching your program and thinking about these things. Again, I think getting too focused is the wrong approach. Getting too determined about I'm going to have this job or that job is the wrong approach. But saying I'm going to make the most of what I have at this moment in my life with the competing forces that I have. And those competing forces may include I need to bring in more than 50% of my household income at the age of 17. But to try and still say, even while I'm doing that, I'm going to go to a place like BMCC and pick up a couple of courses and help direct myself. So the problem is, I think, where there can be a concern is where folks just kind of stumble through things. You just have to have your head up just a little bit further, to look just a little bit further down the road, which is not the same thing as having, I was going to talk about a triptych, AAA, people don't do that anymore. It's not the same thing as having your destination in your GPS all ready to go, but instead looking around and seeing the terrain as you move forward and saying, this is a nice little place to stop. Let me take a look in here, and here's an opportunity to make a little money while learning a new skill. Right.
I mean, I can definitely add on to that thought process. I majored in biochemistry, and I'm not a biochemist. But I think the themes that both of you are saying in terms of having just that focus to say what is that you want as the end goal. It does not have to be a job title. It doesn't have to be at a company, but a theme of what is that you want to do when you're done educating yourself.
Yes, I think in some ways we're both actually saying the same thing, which is that we'd like to see as many students as possible developing those hard skills, thinking about what they want to carry with them when they leave college, not necessarily knowing exactly what sort of job they want to land or even what field they want to work in. In fact, we found that millennials today from our studies at Young Invincibles are less concerned about pursuing a specific career as opposed to developing certain skills that will help them be very flexible and adaptable to many different work environments. So it's, again, those hard skills and the soft skills that we think are really important to start being aware of, but also just financial circumstance. So many young people enter college today and they're not aware of their loan repayment options when they take out student loans. And then they leave college with all of this student loan debt, and suddenly they have 9 repayment options to choose from, and maybe they haven't navigated that process so well during college, so it becomes just harder and harder to pay off that debt. That's another thing that we think is extremely important for young people to start thinking about while they're in college.
Very true. We actually talked about that in our previous series, the cost of education. With that said, I'd like to switch the topic over to GPA versus hard skills. It's not necessarily the same thing, is it, Dr. Brady?
No, not at all. I mean, I think the discussion about hard skills is one I can't say I feel ambivalent about, but it depends on really what we're talking about hard skills. If you within the higher education realm, if we're talking about baccalaureate degrees, whether it's engineering or business or science, let alone liberal arts, there's, even within something like engineering, they're trying to give a skill set or broader based so that because they know that the things that someone might be doing today will hopefully change in 5 and 10 years, and ideally our graduates will be those driving the change. So we don't want somebody so locked in and doing something one particular way with one particular skill. At the same time, you need the balance and the broader education that a strong gen ed platform provides. Now, in terms of GPA as well, if you're in the market for a job with a bachelor's degree where you have to put that resume on the table and slide it over, obviously if you've got something approaching a 4, that's going to help you.
Of course.
But in all the folks I've ever talked with in business, beyond that first meeting, that's not what gets you promoted within your job. That's not what has you where you are, Krishna, is the GPA that you had. Thank the Lord that the president of Penn State didn't ask to see my undergraduate transcript. Now, I'm honest and open. I'm saying on the air how I did my freshman year at Cornell. But, that's not it. So it is helpful. It's like the summer internships. These are the things that you can do to help yourself, to do as well as you can in the courses that you have. Make sure it's a challenging set of curricula that is going to prepare you in the general direction you want to go. But that does nothing if you don't also have some real awareness of what the financial sector is, if that's where you're going to be applying and going into a job.
Absolutely. Sarah?
We also encourage students to think about which industries are really growing for our generation today. So right now we know that the health industry, the technology industry, and also the education industry, if we can call it that, are all growing for people among the millennial age group. So if you're a millennial in college and you want to think about how you can start building the knowledge base or building those skills that are going to set you up for those industries, that's a good place to start.
Sure. So let's flip it now. The employer standpoint. In the race to find the best talent, and there's a plethora of it out there, what factors are you seeing as a school administrator when you're setting up partnerships with schools, and what factors are you seeing at the Young Invincibles when you're doing your research, what that employers are looking for? We say hard skills. I get that. But everyone's got hard skills when you start to get the cream to that rises to the top. What exactly are they looking for?
Well, there have been a number of surveys that have come out recently that seem almost contradictory. One that I'll happily point to because Penn State did particularly well, or the last 2 years Wall Street Journal has surveyed recruiters, and the top 10 schools were all state schools, including Cornell, ironically. And what they focused on there is the fact that these students were incredibly well-rounded in their educational experience. All of these programs have a combination of things. So what I'm hearing from recruiters is, yes, we want to see that they've done some internships, that they have an awareness of what our field, our discipline is that they're coming into, but we also want to know that they know how to read well. And I don't just mean that they know how to read the words on the page, but they're able to really think critically about what they're taking in. Strong communication skills, strong interpersonal skills, the soft skills, if you will, and this desire and passion to learn, because hardly anybody, and there's some context I suppose, but by and large, they're not trying to hire somebody who's going to come into this slot and stay in that slot for the rest of their lives, like in Brazil, or the movie, by the way, not the country. They're looking for somebody who is going to be engaging, inquisitive, and grow. And that's the other thing that the Wall Street Journal survey showed, is that these people come in out of these state programs with this incredible work ethic and an inquisitiveness. And so they come in and they do a really good job where they are using all those faculties, but then they also say, well, what are they doing over there? Maybe I can learn something from them.
Fair enough. Sarah?
We're finding that computer literacy and adeptness to understanding technology is extremely important right now, no matter where you work in the job market or what type of work you pursue. Having those technology skills is extremely valued by employers. We also saw a recent Gallup poll that showed that 80% of employers would prefer to hire young people, again, with those hard skills, like computer programming or engineering skills if someone wants to be an engineer, at the highest level possible. So there are competing findings out there. It's hard to really know, but certainly the more we innovate with technology as a society, the more those types of skills are going to be extremely valued.
Well, I think, to take the phrase from Gordon Gekko, not that he's someone we necessarily want to attribute positive thoughts to, but as he said in the movie Wall Street, give me someone who's young and hungry and I'll show you someone who can be very successful. So with that said, Sarah, Dean Brady, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate your unique perspectives on state of employment for current college students.
Thank you so much.
I'll wrap up our show for today. Once again, I'd like to thank our guests for their unique perspectives. If you like what you saw on today's show today, please do not hesitate to subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have any comments, criticisms, or feedback for myself, please don't hesitate to reach out to me via email or Twitter. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for joining us, and remember, every life is a book. Make yours a bestseller. Have a good night.